Speaking of practicing what you hate, Latinx was forced on the Latino community by the same demographic of social justice liberals, and Latinos rejected it. Good one, guys. Those same Latinos, by the way, who are increasingly switching more and more to the Republican Party. Speaking of the radical left using migrants as political tools, remember how under Trump the migrant detention centers on the border were totally concentration camps, basically the same thing as Nazi Germany? And how actually those camps were started under Obama, and how some were reopened under Biden, and how suddenly not only are they no longer concentration camps and no more is there a comparison being made to the Holocaust? Yeah, this kind of shit happens a lot. Speaking of hypocrisy as per the border, that one time that Sanders was stated to believe in open borders and he responded
sharply increasing
open borders.
Foreign aid.
Open borders. That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
Really?
idea, of course, I mean that's a right-wing proposal, which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that.
So yeah, he totally doesn't want open borders. That's a Koch brothers idea. But then during his 2020 presidential campaign, he stated he wanted to decriminalize border crossings, put a permanent moratorium on deportations, and abolish ICE. So yeah, it's kind of like saying you want all the parts for the thing, but are totally not trying to build the thing. What are you talking about? Sticking to this topic, during COVID, border crossings were still allowed, and migrants were testing positive all the time for COVID when they were actually tested at all, and not held for any period of time or forced to quarantine, and pretty much went wherever they wanted to. Side note, I am making this video as I go, piecing it along, so I'm going to jump around a bit like right now. Back to the environment. One thing I have noticed as time goes on is how every single catastrophic environmental prediction always, without fail, seems to be years, if not decades away. I do understand, yes, the science is indeed changing, and yes, the time frame on this is not immediate, yet predictions are constantly being moved years and years and years away. The science is changing and becoming more refined, yes indeed, and yet the response to the skeptics is always the science is settled. There are these contradictions and hostile shaming, and let's just say that this doesn't help the cause. An interesting tidbit here is if sea levels are supposed to be rising, why is it that Obama just built himself a multi-million-dollar mansion and 3 others for his friends right on the beach of Hawaii? With sea levels rising, does this not strike you as a bad idea? And how long have we heard that Florida will be underwater soon? Eventually. Someday. Also, here's an old article from Newsweek about how the planet is cooling and we need to panic about it. So, while doing some research on the crazy idea of chemtrails, I came across a deleted site from the Council on Foreign Relations. It's about geoengineering, why it should be done, and the risks involved. They talked about dispersing particulates in the air with, airplanes and balloons and cannons and the like. Pretty interesting. Yes, that geoengineering topic that people seem to be unable to separate from the crazy conspiracy theories. Most geoengineering revolves around creating rain, for which there are patents going back all the way to the late 1800s, and was even used by the US government in the Vietnam War. Changing the weather has been a thing with world governments for a long time and is still discussed today. It's also moved into the private realm, primarily with Bill Gates deciding he himself will save the world by engaging in this. It is indeed possible to make rain, and it's also possible to stop it as well, like in these cases with both Russia and China. Jumping along, what was going to be part 2 of my Origins of Hate Speech video was talking about how fundamentalistic Islamic nations spread the idea primarily through the UN that any criticism whatsoever of a Muslim, Muslims as a whole, or Islam in general, is Islamophobia. They essentially tried to create the idea of blasphemy laws worldwide, and anyone looking around at the proliferation of the idea of Islamophobia should see that their efforts were successful. A few facts about Islam that few know about. There are actually two bodies of text as per the religion of Islam. One is the Quran, and the other is what is called the Sunnah, or oral tradition, which is comprised basically of decrees given by imams and accepted as canon, and those are called hadiths. These are created by what are called fatwas, and operate under a mechanism called abrogation. Basically, the idea is if any hadiths contradict earlier truths given by other hadiths or the Quran itself, those older truths are superseded, retconned, and nullified. Also, secular or even cultural Muslims watching this video might be able to back me up on this. If you ever go over to the home of a Muslim and do not see any depictions, be it pictures, statues, paintings, or whatever, of people or animals, but just instead scenes of nature or geometric shapes, you're in the presence of a fundamentalist, even if they don't appear to be so. The reason why there be none of these things present is because they consider it to be what's called idolatry, or worship of false idols, which is considered haram, or what we would consider heretical. Also, fundamentalist Muslims hate dogs, especially black dogs, because Muhammad did, and love cats, especially black cats, because Muhammad did. Speaking of idolatry, the Ku Klux Klan spent as much time going after Catholics as they did non-whites, and other whites too actually, for worshiping the Virgin Mary, which the Klan saw as idolatrous as well. Speaking of religious zealotry, Kanye West made some anti-Semitic remarks and is being absolutely torn to pieces over it. As he should, sure, yet it's clear there's a double standard occurring and is contingent on political affiliation. If saying the kind of shit he said should get one absolutely obliterated, then why has the same thing not occurred to Louis Farrakhan? The shit he said was pretty bad, and there's lots of it. I think I can tell you why. He's friends with the right people and has the correct political affiliation. This photo of Obama and Farrakhan, by the way, was kept secret at the order of the Black Caucus where it was taken. After Obama was successfully out of office, it could then safely slip out. For those who may respond to this on the left stating that, well, just being pictured with somebody does not assume any kind of affiliation, then why won't the internet shut the fuck up about Elon Musk being seen in the same picture frame as Ghislaine Maxwell, a guilt by association that he already responded to? Furthermore, how about them women in the Women's March, Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour, for example, who themselves are rather anti-Semitic and refuse to condemn Farrakhan? Should they be dismantled too? The correct answer is yes. And in reality, this detail about them never really was known anyways, nor will it ever be. Yes, they were kicked out of the Women's March Foundation, that is true, and that's all. These kinds of double standards in enforcement of ideals lead to those ideals being rejected, and the opposite to proliferate. This is a core dynamic I see often, and I am actually a product of it as well. On a similar note, I'll start off by saying that negative racial stereotypes are bad enough, but those who validate them are worse. Remember all those anti-Asian hate crimes that were going on during the pandemic and suddenly the news dropped the whole topic out of nowhere? This is because Biden got his bill through using third-party, private, foreign entities to police social media and report back to the government their findings of thought crimes. Turns out it wasn't needed anyways because the DHS had been doing this the whole time, even manipulating information themselves. Aside from the rising police state element, another reason why I brought the anti-Asian hate crime thing up is because not so much of what was happening, but who was primarily responsible for doing it. I'll just let Dave Chappelle fill you in on that info.
Now, you know what I was watching? And I hate to say this, but there was a lot of videos, sadly, of black people beating up Asians for no reason. Oh, these attacks were unprovoked. I couldn't believe it. And I was sitting in the room watching this shit. It was stressing me out. But I was stressed because I kept watching these videos of my beloved black people beating up my beloved Asian people and being so cruel.
The news was leaving that part out, just speaking of racism in general, and giving very little in terms of imagery in the stories. This also led to the recently elected Criminal Reform Attorney General Chesa Boudin to be recalled because he refused to prosecute most of these attacks as hate crimes. The explanation provided for this in the news and on social media in general were wide-ranging and unilaterally dodged the obvious. These crimes were not carried out by whites, and therefore were not considered to be hate crimes. On the topic of criminal reformist district attorneys who seek to reform crime by refusing to prosecute crime, this happened all of a sudden in major cities across the country because of one source. First off, this. Second off, here you go.